Let's dive into some emails, shall we? This is really fun. It makes me feel like I'm running Meet the Press here. Okay, it's like a year late though. The Ray Tanner emails were finally provided via Freedom of Information Act to thestate.com this week. In case you missed it, I don't just assume that everyone's world has been revolving around Freedom of Information Act in Columbia, South Carolina. So thestate.com, if you want to read, it's a multi-part series. If you want to read these yourself, it's on their website. Ray Tanner's emails, he's the athletic director at South Carolina. When the whole Muschamp saga was going on last fall, of course, as is usually the case, a FOIA request got filed. And as is usually the case, the entity, this case, South Carolina, dragged their feet for as long as they could, and then they finally released them like this week or last week. There is no major bombshell here, but there are several fascinating nuggets. Some apply to Carolina, and some are much broader than Carolina. The quick timeline, just to refreshify your memory, because we were kind of following this pretty closely on the show at the time. November 7th, South Carolina loses to Texas A&M 48-3, and the heat is turned up to 10 on Will Muschamp. Now, if you'll remember, the following Monday, Muschamp steps to the podium for his normal Monday press conference, and the assembled media there, they ask him, what do you think about your job security right now? Have you talked to Ray Tanner? What's the deal? What's going on? And Will Muschamp said he feels totally confident. He meets with Ray Tanner every week. They frequently talk about the status of the football program. And he was asked directly, are you worried? And he directly said, no. 6 days later, he was fired following a 59-42 loss the following Saturday at Ole Miss. So November 16th, Will Muschamp is fired. Now, I want you to remember the day, November 10th. So we back up 6 days. That's the day that Muschamp has the press conference. That's the day that he says, no, I'm not worried at all. We had pretty good intel on this. Okay, we had a couple of people really plugged in. So, I mean, we were right on this. I remember being pretty proud of the way we handled this, to be honest with you. So November 10th, why is that important? Well, it turns out that about the time Will Muschamp was talking to the assembled media and telling them, no, I'm not worried, Charles Bloom, who's sort of the chief of staff there for Ray Tanner, he emailed Ray Tanner a list. And I'm going to read actually from the piece. It says, on the same day, just a few hours later, Tanner received an email from his chief of staff, Executive Associate AD Charles Bloom. Its subject line was coaches, discreet. And the body of the email was a list of 10 coaches and coordinators in college football and their salaries. So which names are on this list? I think when you see the list, we're about to show you, I'm going to read it to you too. When you see this list, all of a sudden it'll make sense what leaked and when it leaked and which names were leaking. Tell me if you've heard these names before. Brian Harsin, he was at Boise State at the time, now he's at Auburn. Billy Napier, still at Louisiana. Mario Cristobal, still at Oregon. Hugh Freeze, anyone heard of Hugh Freeze? The big talking point was, is he a non-starter or is he a potential candidate? Well, he's on the list. Alabama offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian, what happened to him? Anyone? Oh, he's head coach of Texas now. Kendall Briles is the OC at Arkansas. Luke Fickell, head coach at Cincinnati. Jamie Chadwell, Coastal Carolina. Skip Holtz down at Louisiana Tech. Sonny Dykes at SMU. And as you listen to that list of coaches, as I said, did it sound familiar? Did those names sound familiar? Now, of course, the answer is yes, because I kid you not, I have vivid memories of at one point or another seeing every one of these names in either an article citing an anonymous source or a tweet about what someone close to the situation was hearing or a message board post from a pretty informed and plugged in poster. It just goes to show you, once you get a little peek behind the curtain, it shows you how names start to leak out. In other words, it's not always an agent leaking his candidate's name out in order to get him a raise. Sometimes it is, but sometimes the executive associate AD has sent an email and people find out about the list of names and it gets leaked. But here's the key. Okay, because I want to read you another part from this in just a second. And I'm going to extend independent of the South Carolina search now, because I want you to really understand what's going on behind the scenes in a coaching search and the illusion that I used to be under, and maybe you're under still, I don't know. But there is a misguided notion. I had it for a long time until I got to cheat and look behind the scenes a little bit. There is a misguided notion that these coaching searches are well-oiled machines, and a lot of times they are anything but. Now, again, I want to stress, I'm not dunking on South Carolina right now. I'm going to read you a couple of more examples that sort of underline what the process actually entails more times than not. Couple of more excerpts from the piece from thestate.com. In this case, Bloom, Charles Bloom, the aforementioned Charles Bloom, told us he researched names he had seen on social media or in mainstream media that had been floated as hot names in college football, and he passed the information along to Tanner. Now, it should be noted, that's literally all he did. He went on to say, I would do this. This is standard practice. That list didn't mean anything. It wasn't something that had been put together by several power brokers that be. It was just a list, and I just sent it on to him for whatever reason. Here's another portion of this excerpt. The Saturday morning of the Ole Miss game, this is the last game Muschamp coaches, as it turns out. Ray Tanner receives an email from Eugene Warr, board member since '03, former chairman. Warr's email simply contained a link to an article from the University of Oklahoma student newspaper profiling assistant coach Shane Beamer. Now, I'm going to stress for the third time, the statements I'm about to make are not specific to South Carolina. For all I know, they nailed their head coaching search. But I want to draw you back to the point I was making. College football is in a big mess right now. Today, a lot of people think they took a giant step towards solving that problem by expanding the playoff. The problem is not attached to the postseason of college football. The problem is attached to the decision-making apparatus in many athletic departments in college football. You've got a huge issue in that you've got people making critical hiring decisions that are so ill-equipped and misinformed on what it takes to win. And things like, a student newspaper article or what's hot on social media. You think I'm joking with you. I'm telling you, more times than not, that stuff is factoring into the decision-making process, when in reality, any coaching search worth its salt is totally closed off to what is trending in hashtags on social platforms or what any kind of newspaper is writing. If the people on Twitter and the people writing the columns were good enough, they'd be running the athletic department. They're not. That's why they're covering you. You're supposed to be working and operating at a little bit higher intellectual or acumen level, or at least you're supposed to be surrounded by people who do that. But that's not the case. And so you get the hires wrong. And then you dig holes that you can't get out of because you got enough Alabamas and Ohio States in the world that are freight trains with 100 cars going the same direction, and it creates this insurmountable gap. And instead of looking in the mirror and saying, we did this to ourselves, you use fancy enough language and you got a good enough nomenclature that confuses people into thinking the system is what holds us down. The system doesn't hold you down at Tennessee. The system hadn't held Texas down. The system hadn't held South Carolina down. Poor hires have held them down. And this is a small microcosm of how it can go wrong. Now let's circle back to the hire they made at South Carolina. So they end up hiring Shane Beamer, who was thought to be the leader in the clubhouse from the very beginning. Now, as I've said before, and I'll say again, it only takes one right hire to erase a multitude of wrong decisions. Arkansas may have done it with Pittman. Maybe South Carolina did it with Shane Beamer. I got an email from Thomas, who also wanted his question included in the Late Kick Extra podcast, but I'm going to answer it here. He said, over the last few months, has your opinion changed on Shane Beamer? Well, no, my opinion hasn't changed. I've got a generally positive opinion of him. I think that it could be a perfect woven into the fabric hire for that specific job. Beamer would be a terrible hire for the University of Washington and could still be a great hire for Carolina. Sam Pittman, does he fit at Arizona? Probably not. Fits at Arkansas, though. So it's very important. Culture and community and fit are infinitely more important in college football than they ever have been or will be at the NFL level. If you can coach for the Chargers, you can coach for the Patriots. You coach for the Oregon State Beavers, I don't know if you're fitting Auburn University just because you succeeded in one place. You get how it works. If you're watching this show, you're a big college football fan, you get how it works. But the point is, no, my opinion hasn't changed. I knew he'd come in and galvanize the fan base. I mean, certainly the fan base got him hired. They were all on board with it, which renders a lot of opinions moot, to be honest with you. It doesn't really matter what an outsider thinks if the insiders and the community at large really loves the hire, because it's your program. It's not my program or anyone else's program. It's your program. But I knew he galvanized the fan base. But listen, that's icing. You got to have the cake. So as we always say, the season will eventually come. It could be rough this year for him, but we're not talking about 2021 as being a judgment call on Shane Beamer. There is no must-win game this year for South Carolina. There will be down the road, but right now they got to get people on campus, people being recruits. They got to get them on campus. There's been some excitement around that program. You have to sustain it. Any firecracker can burn for a little while. You got to have an inferno, man. You got to have something that burns and burns and burns, and there's no way to know if they have that yet. That's all I'm saying about the South Carolina hire, or Josh Heupel at Tennessee, any other new hire right now.